So excited to be doing this. Our intentions here are to make educational content for you guys, right? So you guys can enjoy and you guys can also learn a little bit, kind of take a part of our experience over the, IT channel. I've been in the industry for over, close to 20 years. You've been in the industry, what, 15 plus years, at least in marketing in general.
In marketing, almost 25, but you could say 10.
Yeah.
I'm younger.
Yeah, let's go ahead. But yeah, so we're going to be doing these periodically. We're going to have just open conversations. Johnny and myself, we're going to talk about a bunch of different concepts, ranging from marketing to sales to internal revenue expectations, things like that. And we'll be doing these every single week. We'll have long form, we'll have short form, and just, kind of go through it. So I'm super excited to get started. And yeah, let's kick it off.
I'm super excited about today. We're going to be talking one of my favorite subjects, branding. Let's actually talk about one thing specifically. It's understanding branding versus brand.
Yeah.
I get that question asked a lot about individuals when they're like, what is actually brand versus branding? One of the things that I really want to talk about is the differentiate. There is a differentiator between both of those. Branding is more than anything else how the consumer perceives you. It's your voice. It's the way that you're seen in the eyes of the beholder. Branding is how you portray yourself out there. It's how you're putting your logo, how it's the typography you're using, the color palettes that you're using. There's a lot of different ways that you look at it. And when you're pushing out from a branding perspective, the question is, how do you think consumers see themselves in what they have? Do you think they actually truly understand branding within their own organization?
It's interesting because I also think another thing that gets conflated is reputation and branding, and they're very related.
Correct.
I would even say that sometimes branding can overcome reputation because you've seen companies that maybe do some things that are not exactly great, but their branding is so strong that they give them more opportunities. And of course, I'm not saying that reputation doesn't hurt your brand because they're correlated.
Yeah.
One of the things that you were mentioning, one of the things that I've always liked is branding is kind of like when you get into the party. Your branding is essentially you meeting people, what you say to people, and then brand is what they say when you're not around, right?
Yeah,
it's the thing they remember you for.
Yeah.
And to get to your question, I think that for not just for anybody running a business, but I definitely think for the MSPs in general, IT providers, we get so caught up into the technology of things, right? And, zeros and ones and processes and all that other kind of stuff that I think for the most part, we all try to lead with reputation as our brand. And I think that's a good thing. I think the better you're known for doing the right things is good. But, as many folks out there doing the wrong thing, there's also a lot of folks doing the right thing. So there's still differentiation that needs to be made between the two. And I think for IT providers in general, that's not what they love, right? Sales and marketing isn't really what they get out of bed for, right? And so they don't really think about how branding really actually tells the story. And frankly, a lot of times I've even talked to folks that feel that the brand story is kind of cheesy. Like you're just making something up, right? Like, oh, they don't care about that. But the truth is, brand and branding, I would say that is one of the emotional triggers. It's what people remember, right? Like if you like Disney, you like all the cartoons and the animation, the things that they execute is out of control, right? And we know that.
Yeah.
But you don't really remember the people that drew it. You don't remember the processes. You remember how it made you feel and how that brand makes you feel. And so I think that's a big thing for a lot of MSPs and again, any business in general is really understanding that the more you put into your brand, the more you get out of it. Brand equity, right? So if you put in energy into your brand and you actually live the brand, people will start to recognize it, start to remember. They'll start to actually understand. And by the way, I think your brand extends into, just like your reputation, it extends into everything. So it's not just how you look. It's not just how you position yourself, right? Because it's very important, but it's also about how you implement that brand into every decision you make with the client, with the sales, that kind of stuff. And at least that's what I see from that perspective. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I agree. One of the things that I've noticed, especially because I've come from a more broad perspective in marketing, from more than anything else, from more horizontal, not vertical on the MSP side. And now being driven into the MSP scope here, I've noticed that a lot of individuals, they don't quite understand exactly how to understand the emotional part.
Yeah.
The emotional trigger.
Mhm.
It's almost like they have this block with the emotional trigger aspect. Because it's all about, to them, it's all about the service, the solutions,
Yeah.
solutions. Unified communications, managed IT, help desk. That's what I want to push. But it's one of those things where there's just so much noise out in the game, so much competition, that I generally, and it's almost like become a competitive, almost like a repetitive wheel with
Yeah.
these guys. It's like, could you tell me something that truly sets you apart from your solutions? Just don't talk to me about your solution. Tell me that something that makes you stand out. That's your own story. And I'll tell you this one thing, Adrian. One thing I'm very proud about TRIdigital is when I first stepped foot here, and you were one of the first ones that told me about this, is that every brand obviously has a story. Every customer has a story. Everybody sets everybody apart by understanding one thing that TRIdigital is very good at is that storytelling.
Yeah.
Is pulling the story. Other agencies typically will try to figure out ways to try to push the end game in regards to, again, solutions and but they never really truly take their time to figure you out. And I say this because I have worked with over 20 something plus agencies. I've been very fortunate with that. And they don't really take the time like how we do.
Yeah.
And I'm so proud of the team and how they do it. But one thing is that our goal is to help the client understand that there's value in brand integrity.
Yeah.
There's value brand integrity. What sets you apart? And we try to pull that out. You hit the trigger about the emotional part. What's that emotional part? In branding, marketing is psychological.
Yeah.
You got to understand what sets that trigger to engage, whether if it's happiness, sadness, whether if it's nostalgia, right? Every story drives an emotion, and marketing is emotion. You don't sell a product. You sell emotion. Let's, for example, Apple. Apple talks about, they don't literally say it, but it's the feeling when it goes to the brand aspect. They sell innovation.
Right.
Nike doesn't sell shoes. They sell motivation. You know what I mean? McDonald's doesn't sell fries in their ads and the way they talk. They sell happiness. That's one of the things, and it's so important to have our customers understand that there's a lot more to their business besides just the solutions. So tell me a little bit about from an MSP perspective, in your years, working with MSPs, how do you feel like we've gotten over that hump to try to help them understand truly?
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's very zeros and ones for these guys because they're so smart. They're truly so smart. And the creative side of it, it's hard to really break through. From your perspective, how do you feel like it's been a challenge and how we've overcome breaking through those challenges?
Absolutely. I think one of the first things we should probably mention is, this isn't like, it is magic to us. And obviously I'm sure people who work with us, it's magic, but this is something everyone can do. Right. And
Absolutely.
So the branding processes and things like that, we can provide that. We can send those out as links. You can ask us for it, but ultimately it's just a process to go through, right? Just like anything else, right? If you do EOS or you do any kind of structuring around your business and growth, it's the same idea. If you just take the time to answer the questions, think about what you've said, everyone can create their own unique identity, right? And I think that's, you kind of said it already, but the idea here is a lot of times it comes off very dry. Like, hey, what are the results? How do they impact the business? That's what I'm selling. And that is factual. And you should do that. Asking those kind of implication questions. How does this change what I'm trying to do? How does it affect what I'm trying to achieve? These are all great things to sell and market, right? But it is when they talk about themselves that they really, it's harder to, because, I think there's people out there that don't want to be boastful, or maybe, like, again, they feel it's kind of whack to go that way. But the truth is that that's actually how we interpret people, right? So when we first meet somebody, we kind of get a feel for who they are. And that is, in our mind, what that brand is. And there is reputation and brand altogether. You mentioned Apple, right? From my perspective, Apple's awesome. They've done a lot of amazing things, but there's a lot of challenges out there with their repairing structure, how much you can repair, right? And what you have access to. But yet the brand lives on, because the idea is that you can't leave that environment once you're in it, right?
Correct.
And that's technology involved, but there's also just the feeling, right? If you think about all the things that they market, they don't really market the technology as much as, like, I'm part of the group. I'm part of the in crowd. That's really what they ultimately market. So that's an example of brand kind of assisting reputation, because no one's perfect, right? None of us are.
Correct.
Yeah. But for us, I think, how do we overcome that? Number one is submitting to the idea that I should care about what my brand looks like. And more importantly, how I represent my brand throughout the entire process. We can talk about, okay, cool. I have my website. I have my assets. I have my cold calling, or that's actually a great point. We should probably talk about that. What cold calling could do your brand and how you review it. Because everything is about how you present it, how you view it, and how you ultimately do it, how you execute it. But in any case, you have all your outbound marketing and your brand is then formed from a lot of this. But the reality is what about your clients when they're in your environment, when they're in your process? How do they onboard? Do they get a certain, communication, and what that communication feels like? Do you give this aura of, I'm trying to help, I'm trying to assist, I'm trying to provide you value? When it goes through your, even asking for referrals, right? Like, how can I assist you? If I'm assisting you, can I assist others? If I provide you value, can I provide more value for others that you care to provide to us? And a lot of that has to do with how they perceive you, trustworthy, what, the work you've done. And frankly, I always say this, I know I'm jumping off topic here, but I always say this, like, whenever you're doing sales and marketing, you said this, right? Everyone talks about their service and solution and how good they are delivering them. The problem is no one really knows how good you are until they're already sold, right? There's that joke, right? Where, hey, you sell the person, you tell them how amazing it is. And then the next thing you know, they're in hell and they're locked away because they don't, that was the sales process. Now you're actually a client. And the reality is all of us have that fear. So realistically, it's kind of like what everyone says, right? In the end of the day, people do business with people. Yeah. And so they want to have a personal relationship. And that's something else to consider. You have your company brand, but then we live in a world now where individuals have their brand. Like they always have, but now it's much bigger, right? Social media has made it larger where people can have a conversation, have their ideas, share their ideas. And frankly, I think we're in a world now where you kind of have to share your idea, because if you don't, which I think sucks, by the way, sometimes you don't necessarily have to have an opinion. What if you don't have an opinion, or you don't have an educated opinion yet, so you're afraid to show it? But that's another story for another time. But ultimately, company and your people in it, the correlation between them, I think is really important. I think that we've overcome that a few times with different folks, is just, hey, have you really established your own personal brand? Some people might say, I don't want to do that. I want to go out there. And I think we can have an entire conversation about just getting over the insecurities, I would say, of like putting yourself out there and saying your ideas. And look, you're never going to be perfect. You're not going to, I grew up in this business environment where you got to say the right thing all the time, and you have to say the things that everyone likes. But the truth is, we're at this point now where there's nothing you're going to say that everyone's going to like. Just not going to happen.
You mentioned something about, and it correlates with brand integrity.
Yeah.
Both how your own staff is talking, how your consumers perceiving you and your voice throughout the engagement. That's something that we do here at TRIdigital, right? When we talk about the client journey.
Sure. Yeah.
So the client journey experience. And it falls back in alignment with the brand integrity. Brand integrity is not just how the consumer sees you in your brand, in your marketing materials, but it's also, right, how they see you in every touch point the prospect to client through partnership goes through, right? From the first email that they send out from sales to all the way through the onboarding process and beyond. It's one of those things where I've always felt that if you don't have brand integrity or in that strengthen your client journey, you could, your sales team could sell you up the storm. That sales process could be the most gorgeous process you've ever gone through. They're selling you Walt Disney. But then after you engage and you continue in that journey, I see companies that tend to fall off in that experience. And then it's almost like you're no longer the same company from when you first met to your engagement across the board.
Oh yeah.
To me, that brand integrity is so important, because let's just, for example, AT&T. AT&T, from the moment that you walk into a store, you're looking at the experience of how they have their brand integrated with their phones, with their, pull-up banners everywhere. There's always the same brand, how it is. When you're calling them, that they have a structure of how they answer their phones. They have a structure where their emails, they have a specific structure in how they send out their emails, whether they're asking questions or whatever, even customer service, how they have that platform. Their contracts, the way they look, it's all cohesive. It's all cohesive. Even their surveys that they send out, it's all cohesive. It's one brand tone.
But you mentioned something. why do they let it go? I think it's easy to start anything.
Mhm.
Let me reverse that. It's interesting. I think that getting started is probably the hardest part, just starting, right?
Yeah.
And then there's another hard part, and that is staying on the train, staying on the horse.
Right.
Because the reality is, as business owners in general,
Yeah.
you have 1,000 different problems that come across your desk. And frankly, you have to balance, your time that you spend building your brand and generating real revenue. And so right, because there's a science, there's an art and there's a science.
Correct.
And I think that's actually probably a big issue, or not, not a challenge, but just something that kind of butts its head is I can't spend all my time on the artsy fartsy stuff, right?
Yeah.
I got to go out there and actually make real dollars and cents. And so, I've always been a big believer in you spend 20% of your time planning, you spend 80% of your time executing. Because when you're executing, you get real feedback from people that are not you, right? Because you're going to have every opinion in the world, and so is everyone else. And it does matter because it is your brand. But at the end of the day, the client is going to set what the tone is. And by the way, I'm not saying that you're going to try to go after every client. I'm sure everyone in their mind's like, why don't we just open up our market, right? Let's make it bigger. And of course, there are other businesses out there that are like, hey, I want to become a $50 billion company. I got to talk to everybody. But frankly, for most of the people that we're talking to, they're just trying to cut out their sliver in the world, right? And they're trying to make their business profitable, a healthy 2 million, healthy 5 million, healthy 10 million, whatever that looks like. And in those scenarios, you really just want the clients that want to work with you. Again, you're not trying to appease everyone. You're just trying to appease those that relate to you, how you do things, your philosophies. Yeah. But getting back to the original idea here is they fall off because of those problems. So it always happens. Yeah. Start your projects, start your branding. You start asking the emotional questions. Why are we here? What are we doing? How are we doing it? And actually, after I'm done, I'd like for you to kind of, for the viewership, just walk them through what a good, a theming process is and how they can probably practice it in their own business. But ultimately, they start that off. They start that process. They might, analysis paralysis on there. They don't get out to market. And then even when they are out to market, there is a lot of buy-in. So and what I mean by that is you start to market, but marketing alone won't get you there by itself. Yeah. It's kind of like, I've always liked this analogy. You can have the right trainer, you can have the right programs, you can have the right gym, you can have all the right equipment. Yeah. But unless you actually get into the gym and use it, it ain't gonna happen, right? So you need both. And so again, I think what happens is you divert your attention, you move off to the sales and the marketing stuff, you move off to the revenue, and that's important and you should do that. I just think that ultimately that is why sometimes people fall off that branding kick. And I think it's one of those things where you could be doing something for 16, 18 months and all of a sudden month 19, it clicks. And that is one of the challenges with an expectation for just generating revenue for a business. Because I think it's clear, I think we all know that branding does have an ROI. I think sometimes it's hard to understand that value, right? And I think we can get into that and we can talk about expectations around ROI in general, but it's hard to understand that value. And then, so what do? We revert back to getting into the trees versus looking at the forest, right? Yeah. Which, hey, I've been there, I've done that. You got to do that when you have to. It's just one of those things, just like anything else you do in your business. You have to be consistent at it. You have to continuously engage. Even if you are drawn to another portion, you can't stop the traction on the other. Yeah. But yeah, that's just one of my thoughts as far as why they fall off, like why it stops. But
it's interesting how branding guidelines are so important.
Sure.
Right. A lot of these guys, sometimes they don't understand the importance of a brand because there's a lot of companies out there that don't give you, from a marketing perspective, the branding guidelines that's meant to be a real branding guideline. What do I mean by that? A lot of people see a branding guideline as the logo, the typography, how should I not use my logo, and my color palette. A branding guideline is beyond that. And that's why I want to touch upon that, because the client journey and everything you were just talking about and how they fall off the wagon, and how they, is because they don't have a lot of this built into the structure of their branding. If you were to have in a branding guideline the do's and don'ts on how you speak, if you were to have in your branding guideline for your sales team, how you should reach out to a customer, how you should be, the consistency of how you should be selling. I'm going to actually mention something, and it has to do just recently with one of our clients. I don't want to say their names, obviously, but I was going with the CEO. We were looking through, Glass Hive and we're looking at their qualified leads and we're looking at their sales reps and the way they were answering back or the way they were even just doing follow-up emails. And it was shocking for him to see how cutthroat their sales team or that one individual specifically was like, if I don't hear from you, I'm just going to cut you dry. We're going to cut you loose. I'm not going to answer you back. It was almost in those words. Okay. I was
antagonistic.
Yeah. And I was just like, what is this rep doing? You know, you're just like, you're trying to be the shark at a car dealership, attacking this person right off the bat. And if you don't hear from them, you're basically saying you're cutting them loose, that you're not going to reach them out again. You know, I mean, there's certain ways, but if you were to have, from a brand equity perspective, if you were to have that journey, things written out specifically, how they should speak, how that thread should look like, how, from a culture perspective, business, how we communicate, what's our tone, right? Because then we'll get into that from a brand perspective, what the tone, what the voices and all that. But if you have that all built into your branding guidelines, you're basically setting your Bible on not just for yourself, but for your staff internally.
Yeah.
To know this is the blueprint and who we are as a company, right? That blueprint is the structure that should last you for years and move forward. If you don't have a blueprint like that, you're easily going to fall off the wagon.
Yeah. No structure.
Yeah. You're going to fall off the wagon. It's just,
that brings up a great point.
Yeah.
You build a branding guideline and then you forget about it.
Yeah. And then just goes to collect dust.
Yeah.
It's like they forget about it. What was the point of that?
From your perspective, how would you, what process would you implement to ensure that they always go back to it?
Well, for one, that starts with leadership.
Of course.
Yeah. It's always leadership. If leadership is not obliging by it, leadership is forgetting about it, you think anybody else is going to really follow? No, right? From an MSP perspective, you know, these CEOs and CIOs, everybody's so busy, right? Everybody's trying to, like to your point, the sales and everything else. But if they themselves are not setting standard in there, nobody else is going to care. Let's just be frank. Nobody's going to care. But at the end of the day, I would probably say a good way to implement certain things is, you know, we ourselves have our retreats. We ourselves look at certain ways to like come back into the business perspective internally, because you got to look at it from in out, not out in that regards. I would probably say on a quarterly basis, just pull out, you know, the branding guideline, dust it off, look at your sales reps, make sure that process is in place, how they're talking, observe your reps, see what they got going on. Because at the end of the day, your sales reps are your ambassadors. They're speaking on your behalf.
I'm going to make a comment about that right now, actually. Well,
go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not all the MSPs that we've ever worked with have sales professionals. And typically sales professionals to engineers, pretty high, 7 to 1, maybe more than that.
Yeah.
You know, you can have a 15-person, 20-person company and maybe one salesperson. Usually it's the leadership driven sales. So in that regard, if they are looking at that and they're taking their steps, they can definitely do it. But if they do have a sales team, you know, one of the things I always ask people is like, how often are you actually doing, like, practicing with your sales team? Are you actually doing overcoming objections and doing role play? Like, do you do weekly role play or monthly role play? And in that role play, it's the best time to find out whether or not they're saying the right things about your company and how they present themselves. And again, you're not trying to attack them. No, it's the whole goal to help you get there, right? Because at the end of the day, especially if you're moving from leadership driven sales to now I have a sales team, they can't be you. They can't be the owner, right? Yeah. You want that, but they can't be that. So instead we have to drill down what are the essence of the things that you're saying, right? What are the emotional impacts? What's the brand story that they're telling? And how do we communicate that? Now, obviously there's assets.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's always this constant thing about like, don't invest in campaigns, invest in assets. And what I mean by that is you invest in things that can be used over and over and over again. The campaigns are important. You should do that. And there's so many angles, and I'm sure you have a lot to say about that. But my standpoint though is investing in those particular assets will help give them a structure to say the same things that you're saying. But the reality is once they understand the playbook, they have to be able to be flexible with it and kind of make it their own, right? Say the same thing different way, right? Yeah. And say it the way you would say it, but you're saying the same concepts. And with that being the case, the only way to really do that is to actually practice, right? It's like anyone can be a master at anything. It's just, do you put in 10,000 hours a year? Or, what is that's more than a year, probably, right? The point is, I don't know if you've ever heard that, but usually they say like, if you want to master anything or be 80% better than anybody else, put 10,000 hours into a thing.
Yeah. You mentioned playbook.
Yeah.
And here's a good analogy to compare it to football. And you've played football. So I didn't play football.
How would you know?
I can't play football because if I were against a person like you, I would be breaking bones like crazy. But it's one of those things where you just talk about that, right? Playbook. Let's use that analogy with football, right? These guys prepare, and you're the best person to tell me if I'm wrong. But you have a playbook. You set yourself a strategy and how you're going to go against your competition. You set yourself a playbook to analyze and to perform your plays. But what do? You practice these plays over and over and over.
Yeah. Without pads.
Right? Without pads, right? The same thing should happen here, to your point, right? That's the whole reason why they should practice these plays, practice the way they talk, analyze, and look at these, because at the end of the day,
you know what I would say? I would even say, and I know no one's doing this,
yeah,
but I would even say that if you're a leadership driven, like you are the leader selling, practice with somebody. Grab, you have different people in your company. Obviously, you have a lot of engineers and they have a particular way of thinking, and that's great. But you can grab friends, family, and just practice the pitch.
You're going to laugh at this. You're going to laugh at this. Okay. So I did serve, I served in the military. I was in the Marine Corps. And one of the things that we in the service laugh about is the recruiters. Okay. The recruiters are sales reps. They figure out a way to sell you, to convince you to join the service.
It's all going to be gold.
So while we're in the service, one of the things we always talked about was how these guys, like how they sell water to a whale. Okay. And one of the things that that we found out is true though, that they have in practice, they'll go to a tree stump or in front of a mirror or whatever, and then just practice role playing with themselves in the mirror.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's just constant over and over and over. And we always talked about how these guys obviously talked to tree stumps, but they still sold us to being there, no matter what. We made fun of them, but they still got us.
Right.
You know what? They still got us. So it goes to that point. That's why I was like laughing about that, because it's the first thing that came to my mind is these freaking recruiters, how they got a hold of me, and they still sold water to a whale, in regards to that. But it's the repetitive of understanding. So from a sales leadership perspective, you still got to practice. You don't know what you're doing wrong or whatever, unless you reach out and have somebody listen to you and see what's going on.
Okay. So, we've been talking about brand for a good amount of time now. I know we have a lot of high level of philosophies and touched on a couple different things of how to implement it, or at least practice on it, and what things to look out for, internal communication, sales, we touch on a lot of different things. But one of the things I kind of want to touch on, I'm going to give you a chance here, but let's talk about brand differentiation. Like actually how, the obvious question, how do I make myself different? How do I stand out? And I think generally the answer is going to be like, you have to discover that. There's a process to go through, and I'm going to get that with you. But you mentioned this early on, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's really important. I think the first step of making your brand stand out is to accept that your brand has nothing to do with your solution. So we all offer the same services. We use the same vendors. We have the same processes, same certifications. And some of them don't. I get it. I don't want to get anyone angry. I know they love their certifications. But my point is that isn't what makes you different. And so focusing on who you are as people, your philosophies, what goals you're trying to achieve. One of the things we always talk about is we want to change the way that the IT industry looks at sales and marketing, right? We want to change the way that they perceive it, change the way that, whether they're afraid to do it or don't want to do it, and make it something it is critical to their business. And they are sales organizations and marketing organizations, especially if they want to grow. And, I'll take it further, for a lot of MSPs, and I'm sure this is going to hit home for a lot of us, we get to a point where referrals do what they can do. We get to a certain point, we hit a client number and we hit a rock. And actually a lot of times, because there's a lot of acquisitions happening in the MSP space in general. And you'll see MSPs that they just stay structured like this. They don't really grow. They kind of grow a couple, they lose a couple, and they kind of stay the same, or they just maintain the client base. And then frankly, what happens at that point is, well, maybe this is a great time for me to sell, because I don't want my, my revenue to look like it's stopped and that there is no growth, because then, you lose multiples. And I think that prematurely gets some people to sell their business or get out. And while I understand there's great opportunities in that, there's no reason why you shouldn't. It's just more so you may be cutting yourself short.
Yeah.
And so you want to work on these things. And so anyways, that's kind of how we see it. That's one of the things that we want to do. We really want to change and help the channel, which is funny enough why TRIdigital originally created Glass5, and Glass5 is a CRM. And so we're trying to help it from all angles.
Yeah.
So again, getting back to it, I think that's the first step. That's my 2 cents as far as, high level, how to differentiate your brand is you got to focus on that. And there's a process for that. So, what are your thoughts, Johnny? I guess philosophically high level, and this applies to anybody, but just let's start there and then we'll get into the specifics.
Yeah. Obviously it's not just saying that, well, if my competitor is green, I'm going to be red. It's that's one of the things that everybody gets stuck on, is thinking it's always a visual perspective. Being different is something emotionally. It's understanding that emotional trigger. And we touched upon that earlier, because marketing is psychological, right? It's understanding the consumer psyche. But the consumer psyche is a trigger. It sets a trigger. You buy based on emotion. You buy based on how you're feeling. Do I love it? Do I like it? Does it make me remember something that as a child? What is that emotion trigger? Well, what sets you apart, and it's obviously, again, and we're gonna beat this till it's dead. It's not your solutions. It's not your services. It's about you as a culture, the culture within your business. It's how you might do something different than nobody else is doing it. It's how you're probably talking and perceived by your peers, and as an individual, your story. Maybe there's something. It's one of those things where you have to take a step back and you truly gotta open your mind. Okay. I cannot express this enough. I'm going to give you an example. Okay. And I love to tell this story because this is a perfect example. Actually, we had a client come to us and say, I understand that my solutions are the same. He boldly said it. He goes, I don't feel like I am different than anybody else. And I am stuck. I don't know what to do. And I understand what you guys are talking about. I get it. I understand it. What do I do? And this piece of advice is something that I would like everyone to take. You could take it to your conference room, sit with your team, figure it out, or from a senior leadership perspective, take a step back, go have a margarita on the beach, go do whatever the case may be. Just relax, get your mind out of the gutter, basically from the day to day, and try to figure things out. This one client, okay, he specifically was, since I'm stuck, I don't know what to do. The first question I asked him is, let's forget the business perspective. You started this business. Something caused you to start this business. That's step one. Let's talk about the things you like. Let's talk about what makes you as a person. Give me your personality, right? Because every business, from a founding perspective, an individual has a personality. We're human, right? We connect emotionally as a human. We don't connect with robots. We don't connect with numbers. We don't connect with physical material. We connect emotionally, human to human. So from that aspect is what, we dig deep inside and figure out who you are as a person. Okay. Some people may have a sobbing story of why they started.
Right.
Some people might just be like, well, because I was bored working for other people and I just wanted to start a business.
Yeah.
But there's still always some emotional trigger to this. And this one specific company, he had a love for classic cars. And when you look at the classic car, we went into part of our strategy that we do is also our story arc, right? But, and we could talk a lot more into the story arc, but I just want to really nail this one though, is the fact that he was, when we talked about it, and I want to make sure because I don't want to reveal who he is, but I asked him, customer service to you, right? How do you treat your customers? And he talked about it. He goes, you mean that's my number one thing. My number one thing is making sure that my customers feel like I am a friend. You hear people talk about family. We say family here in TRIdigital, but we mean it because we treat each other. We act like if we're like just family for real. Like if you're my long lost brother and Gulak, and who knows when. But the thing is that when we look at it, when you talk about the customers, it's really being there for the customer. He mentioned my biggest thing, obviously, and I agree, is not my solutions. I really truly feel that I have a relationship with my customers that's everlasting, long lasting. I said to him, I got you, buddy. We talked about the classic car side. And we analyzed, why are classic cars everlasting? Why are they so strong the way they're built? What makes them strong? It's their body, it's their engine. It's just that hands-on approach back then, the way they were built, with that care, with that love, right? That was the comfort of everything that was sold with it. Today's days, cars are not made the same. It's like you blow and the freaking car gets a dent.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The framework sucks. The engines, that's the reason why warranties don't go past 4 years, right?
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. Well, we talked about, and that's what the differentiator that we made him. And we pulled that out and we said, you're built your customer service the same way they built the classic cars. They're built to last. And he was just like, that makes so much sense. And I said to him, that is your brand. That is where we're going forward with.
You know what I love about that is you could, and this is important because you could say all those things in a very bland way.
Yes.
Oh, we take care of our clients. We're super customer focused, all the typical things.
The cliche thing.
The cliches.
Yeah.
But when you wrap the car story into it, it makes it human, right? It makes it oddly more specific, and more than anything, it adds a thematic. It adds people who love cars are gonna instantly understand
nostalgic
that.
approach.
They're gonna get it. And I think that's something I want to say too, is that we're gonna get into the specifics right now, but just so that everyone has a kind of review. And by the way, our goal is to have all these things in our Glasside marketplace, so you'd be able to access it and download it. And that's something we really believe in adding value. So we want you to leverage that and use it. But there is no right or wrong answer. Be exactly who you are, unapologetically so. I mean, obviously, there's probably some things you want to be careful with. Yeah. Those are really at the top. But the reality is, you really want to be yourself. Yeah. And similar to you, I have a similar story where I remember I was building out a theme and a kind of overall brand. And one of the things that the client will always say is like, I really care. I love everything. I care about what we give them. I want to give them the best, and I just don't know how to communicate it right. I want them, I know it sounds cliche, but it's more than that. And he kept saying, because I really just give a damn.
Oh, I remember this one.
And I literally took that and said, that's going to be your theme and your brand, because we give a damn. And I get it. Some people might say, that's not the thing, right? And we've seen, a lot of us in the industry, we've seen a lot of different versions of that. We've seen some pretty crazy stuff, especially like, back in the day with Chartech, and, they're just funny people over there. But in the end of the day, being you is what it is, right? And that's how you find clients that really understand you. And so if you're bold enough to say what you really think, funny enough, a lot of times what you think might be cheesy, or what you think might be like, oh, that's kind of over the top. That's exactly what people want. I'll get a little more philosophical. I think why people love movies, why they love all these pop culture things and all the stuff going on, is because they want to escape a little bit.
Yeah.
And the reality is, no one goes to a movie to watch a story about, because you could tell a story about someone going to the, going to the grocery store and getting food, but no one's gonna watch that. It's not interesting, right? So what they want is really over the top movies. There's a movie I love called Big Fish.
Okay.
And literally the entire movie is this guy telling people these stories that are like crazy. He jumped off of a plane, found these two twins that were merged, and they were crazy, and caught the biggest fish in the world. And, a lot of this movie is about, I forgot if it was the son or daughter, but they were basically saying, like, why does my father tell these crazy lies, or like these, he embellishes so much? And I get it. There's probably a lot of people that are like, that's marketers, they're just embellishing, talking garbage.
Or Cuban.
Yeah, right. Whatever. But my point is, it's funny, the doctor talks to the son or daughter. I can't remember him. So I think it was son or daughter. I can't remember. But anyways, he talks to him. He's like, you might be right. Maybe he is lying, but we only have so much time on this earth. So don't you want like a nicer story, like a better point of view, even if it is kind of bleak? Don't you just want that? It's kind of like hope. Don't you just want that energy? And by the end of the movie, when they get to the funeral, there are the people he talked about. Now, was the stories exactly the way he told it? No, but they were based on some reality. So it wasn't lying, but he was, in a way, telling the story how he sees it through his eyes. Same with brand, same with your theme. Tell it the way you see it through your eyes, regardless of what it is, and people will pick up on that.
The perception is in the eye of the beholder.
Exactly. But if you live it, if you believe in it, it's funny how other people start to believe in it too. They start to feel it. I think a lot of people think like, oh, are you really full of it? Are you like really telling me, like, are you just making something up? And I think most people think that because they're being a little defensive, but ultimately people want to trust people.
Mhm.
And if you keep telling that story and you believe it and you say the things, you don't get off of it, they immediately start to believe it. And they want to believe it. They really do.
Yeah.
So that's my point there. But
it makes it easier to tell when it's the truth. You know what I mean?
sure, it is their truth.
That's why they sometimes hold back on it, because they feel like maybe the truth is just not good enough.
Right.
You know
Exactly.
what I mean? Or because it's so cliche.
Right.
Like the customer service is so cliche, the customer service, but there's always a way to tell it from your point of view, because everybody has a different point of view.
Well, from that perspective, let's give everyone some actionable items. So because I know that you're running a lot of working with the creative directors, working with a lot of onboarding processes and theme processes and branding processes.
Yeah.
So if you can, lay out what are you doing today? What's your high level process, the steps that you like, what can the viewership do right now and start that process, start that journey? And I'm sure we can provide more in the future, but what's the first step? How would I go about this?
First step is analyze your brand needs help. Right. But let's on a serious note, there's what we call the content story arc, right? I would say you take this content story arc, you sit back and you analyze and you help answer these questions. Okay. There's 5 questions in a content story arc. It starts with the why, the goals, the challenges, the resolution, and the legacy. Taking quickly high level with these, you analyze the why. Why did you start this company? Why do you do what you do every day? Why do you wake up to come to work? Why is this company even exist? What makes you love, to work with these customers and do what you do? Okay. You analyze that from an emotional perspective as well. It's got to have that emotional trigger, because we talked about from emotional, right? And you figure out, did you start this company because you decided to sit in the toilet one day and you're like, I have an idea? Because that's usually the best ideas where it come from. But
that could be it. If that's really it, then that's what it
right?
is.
But you really take a deep dive into that. And no matter how cliche it is, you write it down. Okay. You write it down. That's step 1. Step 2 is you analyze your goals. What was the goal of opening up the business? What was the goal? What is the goal today? Your goal today obviously may be different 5 years from now. Your goal today is probably a different goal than what you had 3-5 years ago. But you take a step back and you analyze, what was my original goal? Have I hit my original goal? If I haven't hit my original goal, what do I need to do to hit my goal? Okay. Is it because people don't know you? Is your brand not recognized? Does anybody even know you in your community?
Right. So my goal, my big, hairy, audacious goal, why can't I achieve it?
Why can't I achieve it? Then that leads you into the challenges. Why cannot I cannot achieve my goal? Okay. Now, obviously, it's laying out realistic goals, because if you're looking to scale your business by $20 million year over year, okay, you technically are embellishing what your scalability is. But at the end of the day, is realistic goal. Like, why can't you achieve your goals? And understanding your barriers, understanding what is it, and taking a deep dive. And again, it goes back to, is it because I don't have budget to promote myself? Is it because my brand is not recognizable? Is it because I don't have a unique voice? Do I sound like everybody else? Is it because there's just so much noise, so much competition out there, right? And I just don't know how to separate myself from them? Or is it because your solutions are too expensive? I don't know. Everybody's different.
Everybody.
You have to take that step back and you have to really analyze it. After that is the resolution. It's understanding what you need to do to conquer your challenges. What are the next steps?
It's like literally identifying what technically the solution is.
Yeah, it's identifying what this. Now, obviously, there's no perfect, resolution.
Of course,
it's trial and error. Without going to a marketing advertising agency, and if this is something that you want to do yourself, you have to try to do your research and really understand what I need. What are the next steps I need to do? But it goes back to the why at the very beginning.
Sure.
Every little touch point, you had to answer it before you even get to that, because you have to go back and say, maybe my resolution I do have to improve my brand, or I have to make myself stand out from all the noise. There's something I like to say, and I haven't talked about it, but there's something I always say is, what makes you a red picket stick in a white picket stick fence without talking about your services? You want to be that red picket stick in a sea of white picket stick. Your resolution needs to figure out how it's going to make you that red picket stick.
Gotcha. And then, so after resolution, you said legacy.
Legacy. So the legacy is the leave behind. How do you want to be remembered? Right? How do you want to be remembered? Because you could you could have your idea of what started your business, why you're in it every day, what you're serving, and what you're trying to accomplish. But at the end of the day, how are your customers perceiving you? How are people looking at your brand? What is it the last thing that they look at, and how are they perceiving you? Do they look at you as, well, you have a stale brand. You look like you haven't grown. You've had the same brand for 20 years. And, you're just the same old Joe Schmo, and everybody else is catching up with times, but you're just stale. You're just not there. Believe it or not, that has an effect.
I was going to say that one of the things that I love when it gets to legacy is also considering, outside of brand and everything else, is considering, what do you want your leave behind to be? So when people tell your story, right? Maybe your legacy is, I just want to disappear to an island somewhere. I want this all to fall apart, take all the money that I have, spend it all, and go out like a shooting star. Yeah. Or maybe I want to have something that lasts forever. I want my kids to be able to work here. I want for all the families that I have to remember, because it's a very human thing of us. We want to be remembered. We want to be, we want immortality, right? Is based off of people remembering you. At least that's how I see it, outside of children. And the reality is, that's really the question is, what do you want to be remembered for, right? What do you want to be remembered for? What is it that you want? And I think that what I like about that ultimately is, and this is something that's really important for everyone that's watching, is the reason that we're asking these different questions is because you're taking the emotional side of you independently, right? Like, you on my shirt. It's about you, your story. And if you think about it, the whole story arc is exactly that. It's like a movie, right? So beginning, the escalation, the big event, the big problem. How do they fight the bad guy, beat the bad guy? And then what do they walk away from, right? When, when Luke and Leia and everybody walk away from the Death Star after it blows up, what does that future look like, right? The future is open and everyone is free, right? Similar, right? So we're asking these questions, not only because we want to be up here and, and all about you, but also because we want you to be practical.
Yeah.
How to start thinking. And that's the whole idea, is to get you thinking in stories, story beats, taking the emotional, applying it to factual business challenges, and combining those thoughts so that then you can start to think about, so what am I really?
Yeah.
What am I trying to do? What's the mark I want to leave behind? And from there, we start to extract the brand ideas, right? And the themings.
Yeah.
So that's how I see it.
Yeah.
I love
and you're right. You're absolutely right. Because at the end of the day, there's your brand theme, right? Overall brand theme. And then there's your campaign themes.
Yeah.
And that's something else.
Right.
Totally. Campaign themes are, I love campaign themes. When we go into the war room for creative brainstorming, that's where all the great magic happens in that. But you got to have your brand theme. And I would say, to everybody who's watching, focus on creating that brand theme first. Analyze, and I think we've said it so many times already, is the differentiator from your solutions. But I think the audience should already know. I got to make myself different somehow, and find it within you what makes you different. Have your personality come out. Have it shine. Don't be scared to show you who you are, right? And we've had clients who are very vociferous, and how they are, very straightforward, very cutthroat. And kind of reminds me, of these actors that play movies, like they're like the James Bond or some very just straight, it's okay to show that as your brand. That's your culture. That's who you are, right? Because if you're pretending to be something you're not, when the customer starts talking to you, they're going to realize, of course, it doesn't correlate, right? So it's easier if you put it, but to your point, Glass Hive we already have it in there. The story arc, there's a story arc template. They could get in there. They could just download that in there, and they could just start writing it in there. The why, the challenges and all that. Take a step back and analyze that. I guarantee you, once they're done filling that out, that's the first step right? In the direction where they need to go in regards to that. And it's just I'm excited for these podcasts, by the way.
No, me too.
I like this.
I know we can keep talking. We can just keep going.
The only thing I was missing, in our podcast here today was a coffee.
I know.
I was missing a coffee. We got to get a coffee.
It is what it is. We'll work through it. But in any case,
yeah,
we spent a lot of time today talking about branding. And for some folks that may be watching this long form, they might think to themselves, like, wow, how long can we talk about just how we feel, right? And I get it. But it is ultimately all practical.
Yeah.
It is something that starts the train off. It's not everything, but it starts the train off. And I think we're going to, in the next podcast, we're going to talk about how this applies to sales, how that applies to different marketing activities, how does it apply to service delivery, how does it apply to the operation as a whole, internal communication, and ultimately building expectations, revenue, how to build your own revenue process, really how to set that goal and those KPIs. So we're going to get through all that. And, so ultimately for today, I think we've covered a good amount of it. I think obviously we'll ask the audience and ask more folks if they have additional questions, and we can do those separately and have a lot of fun with that.
And YouTube, it's great that they could just drop in comments on there.
Yeah.
They could ask questions. We can help us answer questions for them.
Definitely going to do that. But yeah, with that being said, I had a great time. I think it's a good opportunity for us to continue to do this and provide good education. So yeah, I'm good to go, man. I think we got it.
Yeah,
we did it.
All right, buddy. I'll see you on the next one.